said she'd never make it without him. But now he's the one begging for her back. Watch how the woman he pushed away rises to fame, finds love, and leaves him in regret. This is Elizabeth Moore's story: heartbreak, power, and ultimate triumph. The London sky was the color of steel, low clouds pressing against the glass towers of Canary Wharf. Rain streaked down the wide windows of Brown Technology's penthouse office, blurring the skyline into gray watercolor shapes. Inside, the silence between Thomas Brown and Elizabeth Moore was so thick it felt alive. Elizabeth stood in front of his massive mahogany desk, portfolio in hand, her pulse pounding in her ears. Thomas's jaw was tight, his tailored navy suit crisp, his tone clipped with the finality of a verdict. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low but sharp, "you're being naive. This industry isn't built on passion or art. It's built on power. And you don't have that without me." She blinked, stunned, hoping she'd misheard. "You're saying I can't make it without you?" "I'm saying you'll never make it without me," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "You're talented, yes. But talent doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't keep the wolves away." His words cut through her chest like cold air. For months, she'd sensed him pulling away. Less patience, more control. He had stopped seeing her as a woman with dreams and started treating her like a possession that needed managing. She tried to steady her voice. "I thought you admired that I had my own vision." "I admired it when it stayed within reason," he said, eyes narrowing. "But this fantasy of starting your own fashion brand? It's reckless. You're throwing away stability for a dream that won't survive a month in the real world." Elizabeth's throat tightened. "Maybe I'd rather fail trying than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it." Thomas's expression hardened. "You're being emotional again." "That's exactly what I'm talking about." Her fingers trembled as she placed her office badge on the table. The air between them felt colder than the rain outside. "You think emotion is weakness," she said softly. "But it's the reason people believe in something. It's what makes art and love worth it." He looked away, unbothered. "You'll see I was right. The world doesn't reward dreamers." Elizabeth's heart broke quietly inside her chest. For a moment she almost stayed, almost begged him to believe in her. But something deep inside whispered that this was her moment to choose herself. Her voice was steady when she finally said, "Then watch me." She turned and walked toward the door, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble floor. The elevator doors closed, and she let out a breath that trembled into a sob. By the time she stepped onto the rainy pavement below, her tears mixed with the drizzle, and she didn't bother to hide them. London's streets blurred around her, traffic lights, umbrellas, puddles reflecting the glow of the city. She didn't have a plan, but she had resolve. And that for now was enough. Weeks turned into months. Elizabeth's sleek office wardrobe was replaced by old jumpers and jeans. Her apartment in Notting Hill was small, but filled with the scent of fabric dye and tea. The sewing machine whirred late into the night, its rhythmic hum fighting against the silence of loneliness. Her dining table was buried under fabric swatches, half-finished sketches, and unpaid bills. A cup of chamomile tea sat untouched beside her as she sewed, her fingers raw from long hours. Some nights she cried quietly over broken zippers and thread that kept snapping. But every time she thought of Thomas's words, "You'll never make it without me," something inside her hardened. When her sewing machine jammed one night, she slammed her fist against the table and buried her face in her hands. "Why did I think I could do this?" she whispered. The next morning, Amira, her best friend, showed up holding takeaway coffee and 2 muffins. "Because you can," Amira said, pushing open the window to let the fog out. "You're not just good, Liz. You're special. You've got heart, and that's what's missing in those glossy boardrooms." Elizabeth smiled weakly. "Heart doesn't pay rent." "No," Amira said, sitting beside her, "but it'll build something that does." That evening, as the rain returned, Elizabeth stood on her tiny balcony with a lighter in her hand. She held her old Brown Technologies ID badge between her fingers, its photo a reminder of who she used to be. Safe, obedient, small. With one deep breath, she flicked the lighter. The plastic melted, flame curling around her face in the picture until it turned black. She dropped it into a metal bowl and whispered, "Goodbye." The next morning, she woke up lighter. 2 weeks later, a miracle arrived, disguised as an accident. Elizabeth was sketching at her favorite cafe when a woman seated nearby, an influencer with a large following, complimented her denim jacket. "That's incredible." "Where did you get it?" the woman asked, pulling out her phone. Elizabeth blushed. "That's one of my designs." "Seriously?" The woman snapped a photo before Elizabeth could protest. "People are going to love this." By the next morning, Elizabeth's phone buzzed nonstop. Her Instagram was flooded with messages. "Do you sell this? Where can I buy one? Your designs are stunning." She barely slept that night, replying to every comment, sketching more pieces and taking pre-orders she didn't yet know how to fulfill. 3 months later, she opened her own tiny boutique in a corner of Portobello Road. The shop was painted ivory with a sign that read "More London" in soft gold lettering. Her hands shook as she turned the key on opening day. The walls smelled of fresh paint, her dresses lined the racks, and soft music floated through the space. She didn't have much inventory, but every stitch told her story. Amira was there, grinning proudly. "You did it." "No," Elizabeth said, blinking back tears. "We did it." Their laughter filled the air, and for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. That afternoon, her first customer walked in, a young woman drawn by the vibrant colors in the window display. She tried on a bright yellow dress that hugged her perfectly, spun once in the mirror, and smiled. "I feel beautiful." Elizabeth swallowed the lump in her throat as she rang up the sale. When the woman left, carrying the carefully wrapped dress, Elizabeth stood by the door long after the bell stopped ringing. Outside, the city glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the boutique's window. Tired eyes, calloused hands, but a soft, proud smile. She whispered to her reflection, "You were wrong, Thomas." She turned off the lights and locked the door, standing for a moment on the quiet street. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from a pub, mingling with laughter and the hum of London life. The world was moving forward, and so was she. That night she returned home and poured herself a glass of wine. The rain started again, gentle and steady. She sat by the window, watching the drops trace paths down the glass, her sketchbook open on her lap. Her phone buzzed with another new order, another small sign that her dream was real. For the first time, the silence in her flat didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. She picked up her pen and began sketching, a flowing gown inspired by the movement of the rain. Each line curved gracefully, like a promise of new beginnings. As she drew, her mind wandered briefly to Thomas. She wondered if he'd heard about her boutique, if he knew she'd made it this far. Maybe he had, maybe he hadn't. But it didn't matter anymore. For the first time since that painful afternoon in his office, she felt free from his shadow. Elizabeth glanced at her burned ID badge, now sealed in a jar on her shelf as a reminder of how far she'd come. "You'll never make it without me," he had said. But here she was, still standing, still dreaming, still alive. Outside, the rain softened to a mist and the moon broke through the clouds. She smiled to herself, lifting her glass toward the city lights. "To the dreamers," she whispered, her voice steady now. "We always find a way." The city skyline glittered like spilled diamonds across the Thames, but Thomas Brown barely noticed it. He stood before the glass walls of his office in Canary Wharf, hands in his pockets, staring out at nothing. His reflection in the window looked hollow. Sharp suit, tired eyes, and an ache buried beneath success. Months had passed since Elizabeth Moore walked out of his life, but her absence lingered like a ghost. He'd told himself she'd fail, that she'd come crawling back, that her little designer dream would crumble before spring. But now her name was everywhere. More London, splashed across magazines, social media, and boutique windows in Notting Hill. Her designs were bold, emotional, alive. Everything his sterile empire wasn't. A file lay open on his desk, financial projections in red. The merger he'd staked everything on had collapsed. His investors were nervous. His board was restless. He had everything a man could buy, and yet it all felt meaningless. His assistant, Henry Cole, stepped in quietly. "Sir, you should head home. You've been here since morning." Thomas didn't look away from the city. Did you ever believe in someone so much that losing them made everything else lose color? Henry hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If you mean Elizabeth, I think she believed in you more than you realized." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And I destroyed that." He turned back to his desk, exhaling heavily. The sound of the rain outside was faint, rhythmic, like time mocking him. 2 weeks later, London's elite gathered under the glimmering chandeliers of the Shard for a charity gala supporting creative entrepreneurs. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed, champagne flowed freely. It was a night of glamour and polished charm, the kind Thomas had mastered. But tonight, he was restless. The music, the noise, the endless polite smiles, all felt empty. He turned toward the grand staircase, scanning the crowd, and froze. Elizabeth Moore was walking in. The room seemed to pause for her. She wore a deep emerald green gown that draped elegantly over her curves, confident, timeless, radiant. Her hair was swept into soft waves, her skin glowed against the light. Every head turned, but she seemed unaware of the attention. She carried herself with quiet grace. The woman he'd once tried to dim was now blazing on her own. Thomas's chest constricted. He hadn't seen her in person since that day in his office, and now she looked like someone he no longer had the right to know. People murmured around him, "That's Elizabeth Moore, the designer behind Moore London. Her line sold out in a week. She's being courted by investors in Paris." He barely heard them. His world narrowed to the sound of her laugh across the room. She was standing beside Daniel Whitmore, a tall, refined man in his late 30s with kind, gray-blue eyes and the air of someone entirely comfortable in his own skin. Thomas recognized him vaguely, an investor known for backing creative startups. Daniel leaned close, said something, and Elizabeth smiled. It was a soft, genuine smile, the kind she hadn't worn in his presence for years. Something inside Thomas cracked. He made his way toward her, heart pounding beneath his immaculate suit. She turned just as he approached. Their eyes met. The air seemed to shift. "Thomas," she said politely, her tone calm but distant. Her voice hadn't changed, still warm, steady, sincere, but it no longer trembled around him. "Elizabeth," he breathed, managing a small, awkward smile. "It's been a while." "It has," she replied, holding his gaze without flinching. "How have you been?" "Busy," he said automatically, then realized how empty it sounded. "I've been following your work. Moore London. It's incredible." "Thank you," she said simply. "It's been quite a journey." He studied her for a moment, noticing how different she seemed, grounded, confident, at peace. It unnerved him. "You've changed," he said finally. Her lips curved in a small smile. "No, Thomas. I just grew." The way she said it, soft, firm, with quiet finality, sliced through him. Before he could respond, Daniel returned with 2 glasses of champagne. "Ah, Thomas Brown," Daniel said with polite familiarity. "I've heard your name more times than I can count. Elizabeth's told me about your company. Impressive work." Thomas forced a cordial smile and shook his hand. "Daniel Whitmore. I've heard of you too. You invest in creative ventures." Daniel nodded, glancing affectionately at Elizabeth. "Yes, and I've been fortunate to work with some brilliant minds lately." Thomas caught the subtle warmth between them, the mutual respect, the easy comfort. It made his stomach twist. The conversation turned casual, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Elizabeth excused herself to greet another guest, leaving the two men standing together. Thomas watched her walk away, grace in every step. "She's remarkable," Daniel said quietly, following his gaze. "You can feel her energy the moment she enters a room." Thomas nodded wordlessly. He didn't need reminding. Later that night, needing air, Elizabeth stepped out onto the open balcony overlooking the Thames. The city sparkled below, lights dancing on the water. The breeze carried faint notes of jazz from inside. She leaned against the railing, exhaling softly, half proud, half overwhelmed by how far she'd come. Behind her, the glass doors slid open. Thomas's voice broke the quiet. "You always did love the view." She turned slowly, unsurprised. "It's peaceful out here." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "You look incredible tonight." "Thank you." Her tone was polite, guarded. He swallowed hard. "I shouldn't have said those things to you. Back then. I was wrong." She said nothing, just studied him with calm, patient eyes. "I thought control meant strength," he continued quietly. "I thought pushing you down would keep you close, but it just made me lose the only person who ever saw the real me." Her eyes softened for a brief moment before she looked away. "I was hurt, Thomas, for a long time. But I'm not angry anymore." He stepped closer. "I wish I could take it all back." She shook her head. "You can't. And you shouldn't want to. Those words, they broke me, but they also built me. You taught me that I didn't need someone to validate my dream." He took another hesitant step forward. "I miss you." Her voice was steady now, almost kind. "You don't miss me. You miss who you were when I believed in you." The wind caught her hair, and the city lights shimmered in her eyes. Thomas felt the weight of his mistakes crash against him all at once. "I could be different now," he said softly, reaching for her hand. But she stepped back gently, her expression full of compassion. "Not love. Thomas, some bridges burn so we can find better roads." For a moment neither spoke. The city murmured below them, the hum of cars, the soft rush of wind against glass. Finally she turned toward the door. "Good night, Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He watched her walk back into the golden light of the ballroom, surrounded by people who celebrated her, a man who cherished her, and a world that finally saw her worth. He stayed on the balcony, hands trembling, staring at the empty space where she'd stood. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, not because he lacked control, but because he realized what he'd lost could never be regained. The night stretched on, glittering and cruel. Somewhere inside, music swelled again. Laughter, applause, champagne glasses clinking. Thomas remained outside, drenched in the cold shimmer of the city, watching the woman he'd underestimated walk away once more, this time not in tears but in triumph. He whispered into the wind almost to himself, "You did make it, Elizabeth." And deep down he knew, she wasn't his anymore. She never would be. London's autumn wind carried the faint scent of rain and old brick as Elizabeth Moore walked out of the Royal Opera House, her satin gown brushing softly against her heels. The night of the annual London Women in Leadership Gala had ended hours ago, but her heart was still racing with the echoes of everything that had unfolded inside. The applause, the laughter, the speech that had moved half the audience to tears, and most vividly, the look on Thomas Brown's face when she'd spoken her final words. Success isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about finding peace in who you've become. The spotlight had gleamed against the golden curls pinned at her neck, and she had smiled. Not the forced smile of someone trying to seem fine, but the kind of smile that comes from surviving, from rebuilding. When the applause died down, she had seen him in the crowd. Thomas, standing at the edge of the ballroom, his usually sharp posture softened, his expression almost boyish in its regret. He didn't look like the man who once told her she'd never make it without him. He looked like a man who finally realized what he'd lost. But the night wasn't about him. Not anymore. Daniel Whitmore met her outside the hall, his coat draped over his arm, the crisp October air turning his breath to fog. His face lit up the moment he saw her. "You were extraordinary," he said, slipping his coat over her shoulders before she could protest. Elizabeth smiled faintly, her fingers brushing his as she adjusted the lapel. "Thank you. I was terrified, you know." "I know," he said with a teasing grin. "You were practically vibrating backstage. But you did it, and you did it with grace." She looked up at him. This man with gentle blue eyes and a quiet confidence that steadied her in ways she hadn't known she needed. Daniel had entered her life 2 years ago, just as she was rebuilding her career. He was an investor who'd believed in her vision before anyone else did. Not because he pitied her, but because he respected her. And over time, respect had turned into trust, then into something softer, warmer, and real. Later that night, back at her Notting Hill flat, Elizabeth slipped off her heels and set them neatly by the door. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and paint, remnants of her weekend habit of redecorating to unwind. Daniel followed her in, still wearing his tuxedo jacket, hands in his pockets. "You should be proud, Liz. Tonight wasn't just a speech. It was your closure." She turned to face him. "Closure," she repeated quietly. That's exactly what it felt like. For a moment her gaze wandered to the window. The city lights of London glimmered beyond the glass, alive and endless. "I saw him," she said finally. "Thomas was there." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know. I saw him too. He looked like a man trying to remember how to breathe." Elizabeth laughed softly, though there was no malice in it. "He did, didn't he?" There was a pause, heavy with things unspoken. "He came by after the ceremony," she continued. "Said he wanted to talk." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but his tone stayed calm. "Did you?" "I did," she admitted. "For a few minutes. He said he was sorry. For everything. For not believing in me. For letting his pride ruin what we had." "And what did you say?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I told him I forgave him. But I couldn't go back. Not because I hate him, but because I've outgrown the version of me that needed his validation." Daniel's eyes softened. "That's the most powerful thing you could have said." Elizabeth walked closer, the hem of her gown brushing against the hardwood floor. "He asked me if there was someone else," she said quietly. "And what did you tell him?" "That there was someone who made me believe in myself again. Someone who saw me, not as a broken dream, but as a woman who could still build something beautiful from the pieces." Daniel looked down for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Then he reached out, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that felt like sunlight after rain. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I already know what you mean." Elizabeth leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never trying to fix me. Just standing by me." He smiled. "That's what love looks like, isn't it?" Her eyes opened, glistening. "Yes," she said softly, "it is." Across the city, Thomas Brown sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the Thames. The gala invitation lay open on his desk, the edges curled from where he'd held it too tightly earlier. The echo of her speech replayed in his mind, over and over, her voice steady, her eyes glowing with confidence. She was radiant, everything he used to love about her and more. But she was no longer his. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. For years, he'd told himself he didn't need her, that she was too emotional, too ambitious, too complicated. He'd buried himself in board meetings, women who reminded him of nothing, and deals that filled his calendar but emptied his soul. Now, watching her rise without him, he realized something cruel. She had been his compass. And when he lost her, He'd been walking in circles ever since. He thought of how he'd approached her after the gala, the way her perfume still smelled like jasmine, the way her eyes no longer searched his for approval. She'd smiled kindly, but there was distance in it, a gentle kind of finality. "Thomas," she had said softly, "I don't hate you. I just don't belong in your world anymore." And he had felt the ground shift beneath him. Weeks passed, the world moved on. Elizabeth's company flourished, securing new partnerships across Europe. Her story, once one of heartbreak and humiliation, became an inspiration to countless women who'd been told they couldn't rise after being broken. At one of her workshops, she stood in front of a group of young entrepreneurs, her voice steady and hopeful. "You are not defined by who didn't believe in you," she said. "You are defined by what you do when you finally start believing in yourself." At the back of the room, Daniel watched her with quiet admiration, his hands tucked into his pockets. She caught his gaze and smiled, a small, knowing smile that spoke of shared journeys and new beginnings. Later, as they walked along the Thames under the soft glow of streetlights, Daniel slipped his hand into hers. "Do you ever miss him?" he asked carefully. Elizabeth looked out at the water, her reflection rippling with the current. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I don't miss the way he made me feel. I miss what I thought we could have been. There's a difference." Daniel nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "He'll probably always carry that regret." "I know," she said, "and maybe that's his lesson, just like mine was learning that love shouldn't hurt to be real." They stopped by the railing, the city lights shimmering around them. "I never thought I'd love again," she said quietly. "Not after everything." Daniel turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You didn't need to find love to prove you'd healed," he said softly. "You just needed to remember that you were already whole." Her eyes welled with emotion. "And yet, I found you." He smiled, pulling her close as the wind danced around them. "Lucky me," he whispered. Months later, at a charity event for women entrepreneurs, Elizabeth was approached by a journalist who asked about her journey, how she overcame heartbreak, failure, and doubt. Elizabeth smiled thoughtfully before answering. "I stopped waiting for someone to choose me," she said. "I started choosing myself. That's when everything changed." The interviewer smiled. "And now you're one of the most influential women in London. Do you ever feel like you've proven him wrong?" Elizabeth's eyes softened, her voice gentle. "No, I didn't build all this to prove him wrong. I built it to prove me right." That night, as the city slept, Thomas Brown found himself scrolling through a news article featuring her photo. Elizabeth, standing on stage, radiant in a tailored navy dress, holding an award for Entrepreneur of the Year. He stared at the screen for a long time. His chest tightened. Then he exhaled, long and slow. He could have been standing beside her in that photo. He could have been the one who believed in her. But he wasn't. For the first time in years, he whispered into the quiet, "I'm sorry." No one heard it but him, and yet, somehow, it felt like the world did. The following morning, sunlight spilled through Elizabeth's window, catching the soft curls of her hair as she sipped coffee at the kitchen counter. Daniel sat across from her, reading the paper, one leg tucked casually over the other. He looked up, smiling. "Big day today?" She nodded. "Another investor meeting, but it feels different now. Lighter somehow." Daniel set the paper aside. "That's what happens when you're walking in peace, not pain." Elizabeth smiled. "I like that." He leaned forward, brushing her hand with his. "And I like you, Ms. Moore. Just as you are." Outside, the morning traffic hummed softly. London carried on, unaware of the quiet triumphs unfolding in that sunlit flat. The kind born not from revenge or regret, but from growth, forgiveness, and love that chose peace over pride. And as Elizabeth looked out at the city that had once broken her heart, she realized something beautiful. She had found her way back to herself. And that was the greatest love story of all. Thank you for being part of Whispers of Hope. Your love and support mean more than words. Together we're spreading light, one whisper at a time.